It's the same old story. Corporations do stock buybacks. They do big dividend checks. They lay off workers. Goes on to say these things are happening because the railroads are simply not investing the way they should in car safety and the rail lines themselves.
Well, as I noted, we invest over $1 billion a year in our safety program in the form of maintenance, in the form of equipment, in the form of technology. There's more to be done, as you can imagine. Since this occurred, every single day, I've asked myself, what could we have done better? What could we have done to prevent this? And, Morgan, it's pretty clear that our safety culture and our investments in safety didn't prevent this accident.
What investments in safety should have been the follow-up question to that. And if you're wondering who that was, well, it's the CEO of Norfolk Southern, Alan Shaw, pretending as though they have made major investments in safety when in reality, last year alone, they spent $1.8 million in lobbying lawmakers to avoid any regulation that would force them to invest in safety. Interestingly enough, CNBC of all places called him out on what Norfolk Southern is actually investing their money in. Let's watch.
The CEO emphasizing they need to do better on safety. He touted more than $1 billion of investments in safety, which I think is going to ring really hollow because you know what they've spent more on? Share buybacks. $4 billion just last year on buying back their own stock. They have a $15 billion buyback program. So if he's trying to win the populist war there on the message about what they're investing in safety, and by the way, in the victims fund, which so far they put in $1 million, they're going to face a lot of heat.
I love hearing that on CNBC because it's rare to hear that point made on that particular channel. But I also want to direct you to this headline from More Perfect Union that just really helps absorb what's going on here. Norfolk Southern boosted shareholder payouts 4,500%, but slashed workforce 33% prior to the Ohio disaster. And of course, that is the Norfolk Southern train derailing in East Palestine, Ohio, which has led to a bit of a disaster there. The residents in the area don't know if the air is safe to inhale or the water is safe to drink. So we'll give you updates on what Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is saying now. But before we get to that, Cenk.
Yeah, look, almost everything you see in media, unfortunately, is theater. And credit to that reporter on CNBC. We love to give credit where credit is due. It's just super rare in mainstream media. But outside of that, generally speaking, if you're consuming mainstream media, you know there was an accident. You know that you saw the ball of flames, and you know the residents are worried, right? So they actually do share those facts. But then it gets spun as, well, my God, this company's trying to do everything they can, and then Buttigieg comes out and goes, well, I mean, we're pushing them hard to do what they can, and it seems like, my God, everybody's trying to do everything they can. Total nonsense, a complete lie. So Norfolk Southern is awful. They've fought safety regulations tooth and nail. They don't want to update their brakes. They didn't want to label the hazardous chemicals and take extra safety precautions. They understaffed their trains, and it's an active decision they're making. Again, guys, I run a company. I know you make decisions, okay? Do I spend money on that or don't I spend money on that? Do I spend the money on safety or do I do it in a buyback to shareholders so that my compensation can be higher? That's a decision they made to pump up their compensation and purposely not spend money on safety. That guy's a complete and utter liar.
100%. Now, just to do a quick refresher before we go to Pete Buttigieg, a lot of things went wrong here, okay? So when you hear the CEO talk about the safety measures they've taken, that's hilarious because the employees for the company had been warning about some of the safety concerns that they had, including the fact that when it came to the train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, the train was too big and too heavy for the tracks. But those concerns from the employees went ignored. Rail companies lobbied hard to avoid regulations that would have them upgrade their brakes from the current Civil War era systems they're using to the electronic brakes, which would help the trains stop a lot faster. And they also laid off a ton of workers in order to cut costs and provide more of a return to their shareholders. Now, what is Pete Buttigieg saying about all this? What is he gonna do to potentially hold them accountable and regulate them? Why don't we hear what he had to say during a recent interview?
Today, we are pushing forward a 3-part drive on rail safety. Things that we're doing at the Department of Transportation to raise the bar, things that we need help from Congress to do in order to hold rail companies accountable, and things that this industry needs to do differently. For example, we are advancing the requirement on 2-person crews on trains. Believe it or not, the rail industry has been pushing to be allowed to have trains have only 1 human being on board. Under the Obama administration, a rule went into effect calling for a stronger type of tank car to be fully rolled out across the industry by 2025. That got pushed back by an act of Congress to 2029. I'm calling on Congress to work with us to move that date back up, but also the rail industry can do that without us making them, and I hope they will make that change while we simultaneously work on the regulation.
No, but Pete, they're not going to, and you know that. You know that. So notice that there's a lot of looking outward, lots of deflection, lots of focus on, oh, we need Congress. And Pete knows Congress is where legislation goes to die. He knows that. And then urging the railroads to do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts is one of the most ridiculous things imaginable, because it's not about being a good guy or bad guy, good company or bad company. It's about a machine that is meant to provide a return on investment to shareholders. That is their only goal. And if they can cut costs in order to increase the profits, they're gonna do it. They're not gonna invest in safety out of the goodness of their hearts. That's not how it works, and he knows that. He worked at McKinsey, he knows that, he knows it. So he thinks we're stupid.
This is another excellent example of what happens behind the scenes in media and how much it influences what you see. If you're watching Good Morning America, you're an older American, you're still watching TV, it sounds like Stephanopoulos asked him a couple of tough questions about the situation, and Buttigieg laid out all these different things that he's doing. And then you get the sense that, oh, I am comforted. Buttigieg is on the job and these people are being held accountable. What Stephanopoulos doesn't ask is the interesting part, right? So wait, you say you're urging Congress. Well, but you also said that Obama's been urging Congress since 2015. So how's that working out for you, right? How much urging does Congress need? And Secretary Buttigieg, when's the last time Congress passed any kind of safety regulations? You think you've got 60 votes to break a Republican filibuster on that? So, okay, so Congress, you're hoping, but that's very unlikely to happen.
And he knows
You're urging the industry to do that, but as a regulator, is that your job? Because couldn't everyone urge? I could urge, any citizen could urge. Isn't your job as a regulator to enforce rather than to urge? So if you're saying that you're urging the industry to do the right thing, doesn't that mean by definition you're not enforcing regulations? Yeah. And in fact, so instead of doing something, you're actively choosing not to do something, except come on here and tell us a bunch of crap. But Stephanopoulos doesn't say any of that. So if you just watched it and you didn't read Noam Chomsky, you'd be like, oh my God, it looks like Buttigieg is on the job.
You know, I urged an armed robber to avoid robbing an individual in my neighborhood just the other day.
But he wouldn't listen.
It didn't work.
I mean, there's what else could I do as a cop? Okay, stand a post, and that goes to, again, something that Chomsky talks about all the time, which is manufacturing consent. Guys, he said about the National Train Safety Organization. Sorry, I screwed up the letters there, but he's like, you know, they are very independent and they should independently regulate, right? But brother, you're also independent of them. Why don't you regulate?
Because he doesn't want to.
Because he doesn't want to regulate. And you're never gonna find that out if you watch TV.
Now, one other thing I wanted to mention is, you know, there could be a regulation having to do with the workforce or the number of employees these rail companies need to have if they're gonna operate appropriately. Because as we've shared with you before, as a whole, the rail industry at its peak had 1 million workers. They cut that all the way down to 200,000. So think about that. Think about how understaffed they are by design, So I was looking into this, and there's a publication known as Freight Waves. Pretty good publication, lots of detail here that I was unfamiliar with. So according to employee headcount data, Norfolk Southern has supplied data that Norfolk Southern has supplied to the Surface Transportation Board. The number of employees who belong to the train and engine category fell 33% from 11,186 in September of 2016 to just 7,461 in August of 2021. The train and engine category includes locomotive engineers, train conductors, and brakemen, according to the Federal Railroad Administration. As a result of Norfolk Southern's precision scheduled railroading, which of course is supposed to be more efficient, trains went from 80 to 90 rail cars supported by 5 workers to 2 workers overseeing 150 rail cars or more. This enabled management to effectively invert how much companies spent on workers and how much profit they generated for shareholders. And let's take a look at this fun graph that shows you Norfolk Southern's use of this method to be more efficient. It generates the high profit margins at the expense of the workers. So you see that decline in compensation and benefits revenue because there's less workers to compensate, of course, but their profit margin, oh, that increased significantly.
Yeah, for sure. So look, first of all, it was the National Transportation Safety Board that I was trying to say earlier. But second of all, Buttigieg said something else in that interview with Stephanopoulos. He said, well, these companies, they've been fighting these regulations tooth and nail. They've been fighting them so much. But why don't both of you guys finish the thought? How do they fight them? I mean, they could be like, oh, golly gee, we don't want you to regulate. Well, that's irrelevant, who cares, right? Oh no, they fight with money, right? They send in lobbyists and campaign contributions. But who receives the money? Oh, right, your colleagues do, Buttigieg. So both Republicans and Democrats, remember Obama had huge majorities, right? And Biden's had all, had the House, the Senate, and the White House in the first 2 years. So it was Democrats who also received the money as well as the Republicans, right? And then they voted against you or said they were gonna vote against you for safety regulations because they had been bribed. Why don't you ever finish that thought? What do you mean fight regulations? You mean through bribes, but you will never see that in American media. That's a fact. Those are legalized bribes in the form of campaign contributions, and they buy the politicians. They never finish the thought, even though it's super obvious, but if you're watching at home, you don't know that because nobody ever told you in the news industry.
Also, final thing I'll say about the ability to regulate the rail industry unilaterally, okay? It is fascinating because whenever a Democrat is in charge, there's all these excuses like, oh, we want to regulate, but there's all these obstacles and there's Congress and it's so interesting that as soon as there's a Republican administration, the Transportation Department unilaterally deregulates. Unilaterally, easy, so easy.
Yeah, when it comes to regulation, the Democrats are like, oh, I can't lift it, oh, this pen,
so many obstacles. I couldn't do it, I'm sorry, what can I do? Yeah.
Republicans are like, oh, deregulate right away, no problem.
That's it.
And nobody ever blinks an eye, okay?
It's amazing.
So, all right, last thing is from an employee of Norfolk Southern. Stop Dragging's a member of ours and wrote in, figure I'll say it again, per a Money Magazine article, Norfolk Southern, my employer, was ranked the 2nd worst large company to work for based on Glassdoor scores. So on top of everything else, they also crush their workers. But when it comes to Democrats, oh, I don't know how to do it. Oh my God, just magically they stopped all of this. No, they stopped it with money, bribes they gave to you guys, as well as all of the Republican politicians. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.